Welcome to Dairy Australia's first Countdown webinar for dairy farmers. I'm Mark Humphris. I'm the Countdown project leader. I'm joining you today from my farm in Newry in Gippsland, Victoria. I'd also like to introduce Zoe Vogels. She's a veterinarian with the Vet Group. She's a co-owner of a dairy farm near Timboon in Scotts Creek, and she's a cups on, cups off trainer, an advisor short course trainer, an illustrator, and a supreme editor of and helps a lot in our Countdown program. So welcome, Zoe.
Thanks, Mark.
This is exciting. It's a newer concept to try and get some good messages out via this webinar platform. Hopefully, in a cost-effective way. We live in a big country, and hopefully we can get some extension messages out to both producers and to other advisors. I trust that your internet connections are working well. If they do falter, this webinar will be recorded and emailed to you in a week or so. So you may choose to use this at a later date with other people within your business, other people working on your farm, or other clients if you're joining us as an advisor. Some of you may not be aware of the webinar format, but throughout the presentation we'd encourage you, I think there's been a number of questions already, just to if I can just use this arrow to move over there, in your type your questions down and just hit enter to actually have them viewed by us. So what Zoe and I will aim to do is the person that's not presenting will either respond to your question or ask your question of the presenter. So, and there may be questions that we can't answer, and we'll certainly follow up with you with email afterwards. So it's an interactive format. So as we said, you can ask questions. We'd like you to ask questions, but also we'll be asking some questions of you throughout. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome or introduce Erica Oakes. She works within Dairy Australia and has been instrumental, along with Catherine Davis, in setting up this webinar on pre-milking teat disinfection. So I'd like to now continue with the key outcomes for today's webinar. We really want to seek an understanding of the recent Australian research into pre-milking teat disinfection. We want to be able to understand some of the other reasons for implementing pre-milking routines, and we want to understand what pre-milking options are currently available to use strategically or routinely on your farm. And firstly, I'd like to just cover some mastitis principles to put the discussion in context. So here, an illustration drawn by Zoe. We've got just a diagram showing a teat and a smooth teat end and not many bacteria represented by the blue dots. And so really we're talking about reducing the chance of mastitis. If we've got a really good teat end and not many bacteria, there's a low risk of mastitis. Whereas if we've got a smooth teat end but lots of bacteria, they can overcome the teat canal defences and certainly infers an increased risk of mastitis. Similarly, the risk of mastitis can increase if there's a rough teat end and a moderate amount of bacteria where bacteria can hide and they're easier for them to enter the teat. All of these situations can be made worse by or riskier with the introduction of water. So throughout the presentation we'll be talking about higher challenge times where there may be a lot more bacteria near the teat end, and I thought it was worthwhile just talking about some of these principles in terms of reducing the risk of mastitis. So what we're aiming for is a clean, dry and plump teats. This has been one of the core principles of Countdown, and that's what we're aiming for on the left there, clean, dry and plump teats. And we want to be able to manage we want to be able to manage the dirty teats that we see when we're milking cows, like that slide on the right. Just following on from the diagrammatic representation, with this slide here, we can see a very rough teat end on the left, a rough teat end on the right, and a smooth teat end. And we can see there that in the above two examples there's a higher risk of mastitis where bacteria can gain entry, and so we'll be talking about these situations as well. The discussion on pre-milking teat disinfection and pre-milking teat preparation also needs to be put into further context by actually a brief description of where we dairy. For a lot of us, we're in pretty favourable conditions for much of the year, and so the need for pre-milking teat disinfection may be a lot less, and we'll soon see by actually stepping through the research that was done, which Zoe will introduce and discuss, that for many of you, it may not be needed for much of the year, and we're fortunate for that in the situations and the environments where we milk cows. We also need to understand that it's a real factor in the labour costs, and also the tendency for and the drive for larger numbers of cows to be milked per person. Also, the situation is in Australia where we actually feed sometimes a fair bit of grain within the dairy. So where there's impetus and where there's impetus in other countries to actually reduce milking time and have really fast milking times, that may not be quite the case in some of your farms, because there's a reasonable amount of grain that the cows have actually got to consume. Also like to put it in context in terms of the market. I put there just the products with higher return, and really I think the market's changing reasonably quickly, where I think processors are aiming to sell products with higher return, such as other nutritionals and infant formulas and things like that. And with this, there's a higher demand, a higher requirement for quality, and in some of these situations it does infer higher risk in these markets. I'd like to just quote from a committee from Dairy Moving Forward back in 2010, saying that the quality of raw milk at the farm gate sets the ceiling on the quality of liquid milk and dairy products. Put simply, there is no fix beyond the farm gate for poor milk quality. I think it's good to just put some of these things in context, even though for many of you, pre-milking teat disinfection may not feature for much of the year, but I think it's important as there's a reasonable amount of interest in pre-milking teat disinfection to discuss this topic, and also talk about certainly talking about the Australian research on pre-milking teat disinfection. So I'd like to so they're the topics that we're going to cover. Zoe's going to cover the Australian research on pre-milking teat disinfection. I'll then cover other potential benefits of pre-milking teat preparation, the considerations for implementation, and some of the different options available. So these are certainly not, we're not advocating the use of these, but really providing some options that are currently being used. So I'd like to introduce Zoe. Actually, I'll just introduce our first audience poll so we can get a handle on that. Erica, if you could just pop that slide up. Thanks, Erica. Just to get a sense of who's with us today. Thank you very much. We'll just close it off in a few seconds. And Zoe, if you could cover the research. Thanks.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the Australian research on pre-milking teat preparation, and this was a study done in 2012, and it was funded for the most part by the Gardner Foundation, and also coordinated and analysed by John Penry and Jacob Malmo, Graham Mean and John Morton. So we're reporting on their results. Hopefully we can answer any questions that you have, but we weren't the ones who were actually involved in the study. So basically, most previous work on pre-milking teat preparation and its effects on clinical mastitis has been carried out in Northern American and European-based herds, and obviously these are all usually housed milking cows, and there's been extremely limited research on pre-milking teat preparation in pasture-based systems like we have in Australia. The research that has been done has shown a reduction in new clinical infections, mostly due to environmental mastitis. So in Australia, most clinical cases are due to environmental mastitis, so certainly this is something that could be applicable to us. So they wanted to do the study. When you're designing a trial, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort, so they wanted to target the period of highest clinical mastitis risk to get most bang for your buck, or most reward for their time and effort. So this next slide, it's just I'll just put up the pointer. This is just that's not quite right. Here we go. So basically this graph is showing the incidence of clinical mastitis on 10 farms in Gippsland. So you can see so down the bottom was days from calving to the first clinical case, and then up the side is percent of all clinical cases. So for most farms, 30 to 50% of their first clinical cases happened in the first 30 days. So this is in seasonal dairy farms in Gippsland. So if most of the there you go, there's a little circle showing you that. So if most of the clinical cases were occurring close to calving, that's when they wanted to target their study. I guess some of the reasons why they do get more mastitis in calving and early lactation, you're more likely to have open teat ends dripping milk. Diseases such as milk fever or mastitis, ketosis, LDAs will suppress the immune system. And they're also, I guess, for the cows in the fresh herd are more likely to be in a confined environment, so maybe more contamination of the teats. In terms of the trial's design, it also needed a large number of animals. If you want to get a statistical result, you need to have large numbers of animals, and you needed to do it all at once. So for this reason, they picked seasonal and split calving herds, so large herds. So they were Maffra, based in Maffra, southwest Victoria, and the north coast of New South Wales. And this was also partly due to where the coordinators lived. Obviously, Jacob Malmo lives in Maffra, and John Penry was based in southwest Victoria. So large herds, seasonally calving, and all up there was about 2,000 animals in the trial period. It says here 1,600, so 1,600 to 2,000. Basically, the treatment and control groups ran for the first 60 days after the calving start date, and what they were looking for was a 50% reduction in the incidence of clinical mastitis between the two groups. So, for example, in the animals that weren't treated, there was a clinical case rate of 8%, and that went down to 4% in the animals that were treated, I suppose you could say. And this was basically, if they wanted to make this economically worthwhile, that was the percent reduction that they needed to have, and these numbers, so the numbers of animals they chose was to be able to demonstrate this result. With the trial, half the animals were treated, and by treated that means their teats were washed, disinfectant was applied, they waited for 30 seconds, and then the disinfectant was wiped off with paper towel. So that's what the treatment animals were. And the control cows, the cups were applied as per the farm's normal routine. So if they were very, very contaminated, they might have been washed or dried or whatever was normal for that farm. And in terms of what they measured for all of these 2,000 animals, they measured their ID, their calving dates, their cases of clinical mastitis, all the farms had individual cow cell counts measured, and also they looked at milking times for a smaller group of animals, so milk flow and milking times. So these are just some pictures from some of the herds. So the first operator at cups on, he'd wash the teats with low pressure cold water, so just the teats, not the udders. Then they would spray the teats with an iodine-based disinfectant. They would wait for 30 seconds, and then they would dry them with a paper towel. So they have these little bum bags filled with paper towels, and they use one paper towel per cow to dry them. And then they put the cups on. Teats were still disinfected post-milking, and the person that cups off, they were responsible for detecting clinical cases. So they had the little ambic mastitis filters to help detect mastitis, and also looked for swollen quarters. Now, in terms of the results, so five farms, 2,000 animals, 60 days of looking at all the information. I guess these were the results. There was no effect on the clinical mastitis rate in 4 of the herds. So the clinical mastitis rates were the same, whether they had the pre-milking teat preparation or not. But there was a significant effect on clinical mastitis rate in 1 herd. They also, on this herd, when they were looking at this individual cow cell count data, they were looking for new subclinical infections, and there was no difference in the rate between the 2 groups. And there was also a reduction in milking time for the pre-milking teat preparation cows. So milk flow was high and milking times was quicker. So this is just a graph showing these results. So down the bottom is the time at risk, so that's the first 60 days after calving, and along the side is the percent of cows that were affected. So, and the red line is the control animals, the animals that weren't treated, and the blue line is the animals that were. So this is the average of all the 4 Victorian herds. So there was 1 in New South Wales and 4 in Victoria, and the clinical mastitis rates between these 2 groups were pretty similar. So if you have a look across, about 8% of animals had clinical mastitis by 60 days, and that was pretty much the same in the 2 groups. But then when you looked at the New South Wales herd, you can see there is quite a difference. So the control group, so the animals that weren't treated, about 32% of the animals had clinical mastitis at the end of that 60 days. And for the New South Wales herd, for the treated cows, it was about 15% or so. So it had halved the rate of clinical mastitis, which, if that was me, I'd be pretty happy to see that it had that much of an effect. But I guess the thing is why did it work for this New South Wales herd and not the other herds? It is always, when you're doing studies and statistics and stuff, it could always possibly be due to chance, just something that happened. Or there could be some other reason. So for this farm, they thought that perhaps there was a high degree of environmental challenge. So this was the only farm that used a gravel feeding area for the milking herd, and they also had an interesting arrangement to their milking yard where the entrance, it was kind of an entrance before the yard that had 5 different tracks all coming into it. So it was quite a potential for contamination. So these are just some pictures of their feeding areas. These photos aren't taken from the exact time of year that this was done, but this is what their feeding areas look like. And this next slide shows the yard entrance and track. So it has the potential to get quite a lot of fecal and fecal contamination. It's something that they need to dig out to keep it clean, and again, lots of tracks heading into it. So it could have been due to environmental challenge. It was also the highest production herd, so they were making 33 litres per cow per day, so perhaps that was a risk factor for this particular farm. As for the Victorian herds, that spring of 2012 was unusually dry during the calving and early lactation. And I remember talking to Jacob at the time, and he was he was a bit frustrated with how dry it was because the teats were cleaner and drier than normal, and he knew that it would be a lot harder to find an effect of this treatment if it was there. So after all of this, the key messages that they could say from this study is that the routine application of this particular pre-milking teat preparation, so the washing, the spraying, the weighting, and then the drying, is unlikely to cause an economically worthwhile reduction in the number of clinical cases when the teats were relatively clean and dry and the clinical incidence was low. But they could say that it might be worthwhile during short periods for some farms when the risk of clinical mastitis due to environmental bacteria is high. So obviously, when might these periods be? For herds using feed and calving pads, like in the New South Wales herd, and especially high-producing herds. And then also when the teats are heavily soiled and when teat condition might be poor, or where there is a current high clinical case rate, or where there is a history of having a high clinical case rate on that farm. So I did do, there's just a couple of little pictures. So for example, if you are calving down in conditions like this, or the conditions on your farm are like this, then, green grass, not much mud, then pre-milking teat preparation is unlikely to make a difference. But there's certainly plenty of farms where calving pads might look like this, cow paddocks might look like this, and where it might make a difference. Another thing that the study they looked at is what needs to be considered and how much it might cost. So obviously, pre-milking teat preparation involved an extra person in the dairy, so you need to consider the availability and the cost of labour. Also the initial installation of equipment, so if you're installing wands for the teat spray or new hoses for the water, and then there's also the consumables such as paper towel and teat disinfectant. And then you need to compare this cost to the economics of what mastitis might be costing. They came up with some prices.
Zoe?
Yeah? Yes, Mark?
From Rod Irwin. What was the disinfectant used? And he asked, were there any residue issues?
Yeah, so the disinfectant was the De Laval Spray and Dip RTU, and that's the product that is licensed or registered for use for pre-milking teat preparation. So it's the only one that's available, so that's why they used it. And given that it was wiped off afterwards, there should not have been any residue issues. So how it was applied was as per the label recommendation for the product.
Thanks, Zoe.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that earlier. In terms of the costs that they came up with, so in terms of labour, well, it kind of depends on how long milking takes for a particular farm, but I kind of had about 4 hours at $25. Then the teat spray is 5 cents per cow per milking, so for 200 cows, $20 a day. Paper towels, 3 cents per cow per milking, or $12 a day. So for 200 cows, you might think $132 a day, or close to $1,000 a week. Now, in terms of what's break even, so Countdown has a figure of what a clinical case of mastitis is worth, and that's close to $300, so $277. So if you divide 1,000 by 300, you get about 3 1/3 cases. So if you can prevent 3 to 4 cases in a week, then they would say that pre-milking teat preparation is economically worth it. So these cases, these numbers, they're just things for people. They're kind of a guide. Like obviously you do it for your own particular farm. I did it quickly this morning as to what it might cost our farm, and it came up to about, it worked out at a clinical case per day. So it would cost about $270 per day for our herd, so it's a clinical case. So we'd be wanting to prevent 7 cases a week to make this economically worth it. Now I just see that there's a message, a question from Jeff. What was the cluster management between cows? So I guess it's something I didn't put into the PowerPoint just because it can get a little confusing, but for the cows in the treatment, group, what they wanted to do was to kind of copy or kind of create an environment what it would be like if the whole herd was being treated with pre-milking teat preparation as opposed to half the herd. So in between, or prior to the cups going on, treatment cows, they disinfected the cluster with peracetic acid, but only the treatment cows. And they were just doing that to kind of simulate what it would be like if the whole herd was getting done. But the cows that, the control cows, they didn't get that treatment of the acid. And peracetic acid is just a disinfectant. So I hope that answers your question, Jeff. And just moving on.
Thank you, Zoe.
Oh, I think we're up to an audience poll, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. We might just, Erica, if we can just put up that next poll. It says, do you use pre-milking teat disinfection with your herd? Or for the advisors, it's more a question for the farmers, really. Thanks very much. And there's just another one, if we can put that up, in terms of how you have used pre-milking teat disinfection, or for the advisors joining us, how you've seen it being used. Okay. Thanks very much for your responses. And thank you, Zoe, for walking us through the excellent research that was done. Now I'd just like to move on to looking at the other potential benefits of pre-milking teat preparation. And I think it's good to start with a discussion about different milking routines and some of the principles of good milking routines, what is good letdown and how to achieve it, and then look at some other benefits of pre-milking. So really, as you're all aware, we need to be able to provide consistency for cows to be able to, for them to give freely of their milk, to come in. We need consistency in amongst our dairymen in how cows are brought into the dairy, how they enter the dairy, how cups are applied, how cups are removed, how teat spray is applied, and how they leave the dairy. As I said before, the aim is to try to milk cows with clean, dry and plump teats, and also and timely removal of the cups at the end of milking or low milk flow. I'd just like to take a step back and talk about letdown. What we've got here is a picture of a teat and an udder, and in the middle there's if I can grab this pointer, if I can move it, yep. That's the gland system that I've got the arrow on just there, and that's milk that's already been let down, and when you first put the cups on, that's the milk that you'll actually see come into the cluster. But what we really want to happen is for before the cups go on, for all the milk further up in the udder, if I can move that up there, to be released from the small alveoli. And this is where most of the milk is coming from, and we want this milk flow, not only the milk from the gland cistern, but further up in the udder to come as soon as the cups are put on. Just like to show this diagram about what we're trying to do. I suppose I've done enough milking to know that you have your good and bad milkings, but the aim is to be able to provide a good environment within that dairy for cows to freely enter and give freely of their milk. So what do we want? We want positive stimulation. We want a calm cow. So with this sort of a calm cow, it may be the sound of the milking machine. It may be the touch of teat or udders, but really just consistent routines that leads to the release of the hormone oxytocin from the brain. This then leads to, in time, oxytocin moving via the blood to these myoepithelial cells within the udder to then contract them and to create the milk letdown. So what we want plump teats where the cups can actually attach really well. There's wide teat canals and there's reasonably a fast milk out. So down on the graph there, we can still see milk flow in litres per minute. Well, sorry, we haven't got, but just a diagram, a representation. So we want rapid and sustained letdown. And we also want, once the cow's milked, to actually have a sort of quite a quick sort of stop to their milk flow. And just looking at another example, if we've got a fearful or agitated cow without sometimes really good udder preparation, maybe it's they've been hit or there's high vacuum in the milking plant, or there's something different about the routine. Maybe the relief milker comes with a dog, jumps out of the ute and has a dog with him, and that's maybe only in the afternoon milkings. So there's something different about the routine. There can be a release of adrenaline which interferes with that oxytocin release with poor milk letdown. Now what we've got there is we're putting cups on slack teats. The cups slide up that teat, causing a swelling at the base of the teats, indicated, just move this arrow, by the indicated by the red there at the top of the teat canal there. And it also results in a slower milking with increased, or at least the risk of, an increased teat end damage. So then comparing that milk flow sort of graph, we can see that there's an initial flow of milk, but that's only that cisternal milk which I referred to in the last slide. And then there's a period where there's reduced or no milk flow. And this is a time where you've basically got over milking at the start of milking and can increase the teat end damage due to higher vacuum. And so what this does is actually lengthens the milking time, and you can see the difference if I just advance the slide once more. You can see the difference between a cow that's calm and enters the dairy, and she's got, let's just say a milking time of 4 minutes, compared with this cow over here that, because of these changes in the teat canal, have actually resulted in a slower milking time. So I think it's important to cover that because it provides a better understanding, I think, when talking about the other benefits of pre-milking teat routines. So what we want is we want rapid and sustained milk flow when the cups are first applied. So as Zoe's covered very well, some of the benefits of pre-milking teat disinfection is reducing the teat end challenge with environmental bacteria before milking and potentially to reduce clinical mastitis. And we can see from the last description it can markedly improve milk letdown. In some situations, not in the research that was completed a couple of years ago, but it may well be that you actually include fore-milk stripping. So in that case, it might be to find mastitis more quickly. And certainly other benefits include to increase cow comfort. Cows that are actually not suffering high vacuum during that initial phase and got a sharp cessation to their milk flow, cow comfort does increase. The increase in milking speed has been demonstrated similarly in the diagram before, and it's interesting to note, both in the Australian research but research around the world, that by increasing the preparation time, sometimes the increase in preparation time is cancelled out by the reduction in milk time, and that was found in the research to say that if you can complete the preparation within 60 to 90 seconds, it's pretty much cancelled out with a reduction in milking speed of approximately 1 minute, and sometimes greater than that. Also to increasing in completeness of milking. And in a study done in the 90s, it was found on a full lactation trial to increase milk production by 5.5%. And this was using a consistent routine compared with an inconsistent routine. It's quite a lot of milk. And if you want the reference for that, please contact me afterwards. And also, in some situations, to reduce lactoscan. So in very wet and muddy conditions, there can be a high degree of challenge that actually can contribute to increasing your lactoscan. And I've certainly had experience where even with washing of mud, and you think you've got a clean teat, it can similarly increase the lactoscan if those teats are not dried. So these are different benefits that are there, and I suppose depending on what you want to achieve, you may seek to actually do this. Eric, if we could just put that next poll up. Okay, so we're getting at least a little bit of an indication of how you've used pre-milking teat disinfection, or how you've seen it used. Thanks, Erica. We'll just move on to considerations for implementations, and for implementation I wanted to just cover, I suppose, given the research, the idea of applying this process strategically or as a routine. So this might be based on the need, on the need and the environmental challenge. In these situations, it may well be that in confinement dairies, the challenge, environmental challenge, so mud and dirt or manure, might be constant, and that might actually support a routine use. Or it may actually be in just certain situations, certain circumstances where challenges on the right of the screen there that are particularly hard for the cows, it may well be that you choose to actually implement this in a strategic sense. I think we've all seen and been involved with situations like this where we've got sacrifice paddocks where we're forced to use them. And just an example where mastitis rates may increase markedly. But really, for those of you that are, for most of the year, we're working on clean pastures and clean cows, there may be other times of the year that are particularly challenging. For some people, it may be at calving time. For others, or it may also be during very hot times. And with the hot times, at least I think we can predict when we may need to actually have, even though at hot times people are also fairly stressed as well, but it might be able to be planned where we do need more people to perhaps put these processes in place. So it may be that in July in Poowong, in South Gippsland, it's very wet, and it might be a high challenge time. Or it might be in March or February or March in Bellingen or Casino, where it's hot and wet, particularly challenging, and where you see mastitis rates go up. So I'd just like to just get Zoe to actually describe how you can potentially consider your high mastitis times. Zoe, if you could just talk to that.
Yep, no worries. So I guess I don't know how many of you guys have either seen or used a Countdown Mastitis Focus Report, or for the advisors out there, how many of your farms routinely use them. But really, it's a really great tool from Countdown that if you have the right information and put the right information into it, you can come up with a really good snapshot of your farm and their mastitis rates. So it's something that if you have herd test data, so individual cow cell counts, clinical case records, dry cow and teat seal records, cow ages and calving dates, you can go back and you can have a look at the last 12 months and even the last 2 years or 3 years, how much data that you have, and have a look at clinical case rates at different times of the year. So, for example, the big square that's out there, that's the clinical case rate at calving time, but it also looks at the clinical case rate during lactation, and you can have a look and see how many cases you have had and whether there is the potential for pre-milking teat preparation to make a difference. So for people who've never seen this before and do have all that information, so herd test data and clinical case records, talking to your Countdown advisor or your herd improvement company, they can help you generate one and talk you through it. But I actually, I did one for our own farm yesterday. If I'd had time, I would have stuck it up on the screen so I could talk you through it. But I have it in front of me here now, and it tells me that for our farm, which is 600 cows, the clinical case rate for the last month of August, we had 10 cases in that month. So I don't know if you remember when I said that we would have to prevent a clinical case a day to make pre-milking teat preparation economically worthwhile on our farm. It was a clinical case a day, and we've only had 10 in the last month of August. So it would be hard-pressed to convince my husband and his brother to implement pre-milking teat preparation. But if I can go back on mine that I have in front of me, and in October from last year, we actually had 30 cases of clinical mastitis in that month. So I can't actually remember that far back to last October, but the conditions obviously back then, so calving and whatever weather conditions we had a high rate of clinical mastitis, and it may be that teat preparation may have made a difference. So really it's a great way of seeing your historical rates and if there is the potential that this might make a difference. But of course, there's always the other factors that are involved. So, environmental maintenance, so laneways and gates and troughs, trimming tails and making the udder as clean as possible, and making sure you have happy cows that aren't pooing in the dairy and kicking the mud and poo everywhere. So that's the Mastitis Focus Report is a really good way of getting a nice big picture of your farm. But if you don't herd test and you don't have all those records easily available, there is another tool that Countdown has. I don't know, I'm hoping lots of you out there have got smartphones because there's a Countdown app that you can download. It's free, and what you can do either as a farm, get your records out and have a look at certain times of the year. So you might say, oh geez, back in January when it was really hot down here, how many clinical cases did we have? And so you can type it in. So this example, there was 30 cows that were treated, a milking herd of 600, and this was from the 9th of January to the 23rd of January. You press the calculate button and it does all the rates for you, and it tells you what your clinical case rate is for a number of cows. So it's really handy if you've got a weird number of cows, like 372 cows over, 15 days or something. It does the maths for you and it tells you what your clinical case rate is. So for this was just an example that I made up, but it was 11 cases per 100 cows per month for that time. So you might say, geez, at that time it was a really high rate. Let's maybe think about how we can reduce that rate next time we have those conditions. So just really 2 easy tools that you can use on your farm or with your clients or with your colleagues to work out what your clinical case rate is really easily and really well, I think. So that was just a brief synopsis of those two. I think it's back to you, Mark.
Yes, thanks very much, Zoe, for showing those resources, and just a way of looking back and actually saying, well, when would it potentially play a role in a strategic sense? With the strategic application, as we've talked about, you're responding to particularly high challenge times. The difficulty, okay, we've talked about the need for consistency with our milking routines, the difficulty there is that as the researchers saw and other people know about, cows will take time to adjust to different routines. But interestingly, the authors of that research actually said that it happened a lot quicker than they thought in terms of the cows getting used to that different routine. So, but still, it just takes a little bit of time and the cows to get used to it. The other element is it's harder to train staff if you're actually only using it strategically. I know from talking to people that have it used in a routine situation that it does actually require a reasonable amount of training and retraining to actually get things to happen properly in terms of whether it be washing and drying or washing and disinfecting and drying. So as we talked about, a decision based on need and environmental challenge. In terms of considerations, if you're using it, if you wish to use it or currently using it as a routine, it may be that some dairy types, namely herringbones, are easier to apply this process because you may currently use two people in the herringbone, and it might be easier because in a rotary shed moving to this, it does actually infer that you actually have two people on cups on. It may well be that there's constant environmental challenges I've talked about before, or that you're actually chasing really high milk quality, so with respect to bulk milk cell count and back dough. And also, people that want to do this, they might be striving for a very consistent routine and other individual preferences. In terms of using these products correctly, we only have, as Zoe's mentioned, only one registered product in Australia, and that's the DillaValve spray and dip ready to use, and it's registered for use after washing the teats, applying it, having that contact time, and then wiping it off. I will note that there is effort going into improving or making it easier for companies to register pre-milking teat disinfectants, and this is certainly will be good in time where we do have other products to choose from into the future. So that's a process that's currently going on. But really, I think one of the key messages is if you put it on, you have to take that product off, because if we don't, it will affect the performance of the milking machine. So if you're putting a product on, it does affect how that cup attaches and how the cow milks out. And also, there's a great responsibility to actually reduce any potential residues, and that's the only way in which these products will be registered, that they're actually removed prior to the milking process. We'll just look at the different options that are available for pre-milking routines. I've just put this into, as I've alluded to before, strategic sense and routine. So firstly, looking at a strategic, it may well be that it's just washing the teats with or without fore-milk stripping and then drying, or potentially washing with or without fore-milk stripping, disinfecting, and we need that good contact time for the disinfectant to kill the bacteria, and then drying and wiping those teats before going forward. So just showing some pictures of applying that teat spray, a good picture of good coverage of the teats, but also the udder we're targeting. And in some situations, in this situation, talking about wiping off using paper towels. So really looking at both the barrel on the left picture, but also the teat end to actually remove that with paper towels. We'd all like to have lots of teats like this to put the cups on, but that's our aim, and how we step towards that potentially with these different processes is where we need to get to. In terms of routine, really when deciding, with talking with your milk quality advisors or amongst your colleagues, we need to say, well, okay, what's actually what are we chasing with actually putting a milking routine in? Yes, we want good stimulation for good letdown. We may want to actually put this in place to actually find cases of mastitis earlier. It's important to realise that we do want really good contact time for the disinfectant to work. Maybe considerations for running costs and rubbish. And as I've talked about, we all appreciate that it's particularly challenging at times to have staff, consistent staff, and the ability to train them is sometimes a challenge. So this is an example of, we've talked about paper towels. Certainly there's cloth dairy towels that are used in the States, but also in Australia in some farms. Now, I suppose at that point you need to understand that we need to actually wash and dry these towels. Again, not many people are actually using dipping, but it's a nice way showing to get complete coverage without the difficulty in actually getting to the fronts of the teats. Again, all factors to be considered. Just a shot of showing the cloth towels being used to actually wipe that disinfectant off after it's actually killed some bacteria before cupping up. This is probably something that's new to many of us. It is a teat scrubber. So these teat scrubbers go on the teat, individual teats. They have two processes. One is to actually clean organic material and other material from the teat and to disinfect. And then there's another cycle, so this will go around twice onto each teat, and another cycle to actually sort of wick away or dry teats. Now, these obviously, this is a nice way to provide consistency where staff can use these teat scrubbers. There's no rubbish or laundry, but the cons of this is obviously a high capital cost and maintenance of these units, as they do have to contend with a fair bit of some organic load when they're taking that away from the teat. And also the contact time of the disinfectant. These are actually reasonably quick cycles, maybe 10 to 15 seconds. And so we need to still ensure that we get really good contact time of that disinfectant if they're being used. And also just whether the teats are actually entirely dry. There is a process there that wicks away, but certainly a fairly high cost way, but provides some consistency and stimulation of that. This is just a shot that I hope you've not eating your lunch at the moment, but some cloth towel. These are sometimes used across more than one cow to remove the organic load from the teats and then before disinfection. So removing that will increase obviously the pre-dip or pre-teat disinfection efficacy before then individually wiping and drying those cows' teats.
Mark, Andrew just had there were a couple of questions. Andrew had one about using disinfectant wipes instead of the iodine pre-spray and paper towel, and what your thoughts were on that. So the alcohol wipes, I assume, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm not sure which wipes he's referring to, but it may well be. Oh yes,
alcohol wipes. Yes.
Alcohol wipes, I suppose, can be potentially even more irritant. Yes, it will do a very good job of reducing the number of bacteria, but it may well be that it might do a little bit more damage to the teat without an appropriate emollient with it. So at the moment, there's only one product registered for use, and there may well be in the future wipes that become available but in terms of alcohol, it may be, yes, it'll do a great job with bacteria, but it won't do, it may deteriorate the teat skin condition, which is another important part of it.
And Bill just had a question about teat scrubbers being abrasive on teats. I haven't actually seen them in action. I don't know about you Mark, about
I've just talked to a few people that have used teat scrubbers, and that hasn't been feedback that I've received. But I'll seek to get back to you on that. Maybe it's yeah. So you've obviously seen some negative effect on that. But I'll follow that up for you. So just we'll go back to the key messages. There's two there that Zoe's covered. I think it's really important that us as producers and as advisors, we do go back to the research that's been done. So pre-milking teat disinfection may be worthwhile in some circumstances when the risk of clinical mastitis due to environmental bugs is high. But it was certainly found that with low challenge that there was no difference and no improvement in or no reduction in clinical mastitis. Other benefits exist, such as improved milk letdown, faster cups on time, increase in cow comfort, and reducing back to scan. And a really important message that we've got at the moment, that's one registered product. We need to use the registered products appropriately, and any products that we do use, they need to be wiped off. And that there are certainly different pre-milking routines available, and in amongst yourselves and with your milk quality advisors, there's a lot of things to consider if you're putting them in place to try and reflect the benefits and the costs of what you're doing. And really, the impetus behind putting this webinar on is knowing that people are using pre-milking teat disinfection, but I suppose the importance of actually getting a good benefit from it if you are going to put it in place, and being careful with the quality of the milk that we're putting in the vat. So are there any other questions there, Zoe?
Peter just had one about, are there variations in teat scrubbers? And that's one I don't know the answer to. I don't know about you, Mark. Yeah, he said automated milking machine models seem to be softer than the examples shown. So
yeah, I think there's two teat scrubber products available in Australia, and I think that's two of the manual ones. Of the automation, there'd certainly be that's certainly part of the robots, and Peter, you'd probably have more experience in terms of the robots there, so it may well be the case. So any further questions? Well, I'd like to thank Dairy Australia, Erica and Catherine for setting this up, and also Zoe very much for being involved. Zoe was involved in some farm workshops presenting this in February and March, and yeah, I just think it's something that we hopefully will be able to do more of in terms of having at least some interaction and discussion via this format, where we live in a big country, and it's nice to be able to keep the costs down with actually to getting some of these messages out. And I welcome you to email me questions if you have any further to this, and I'll follow up with Bill later in regards to the teat scrubbers. So thanks very much for providing the time to sit down in your offices or wherever you are, and thanks for Dairy Australia for this format and for putting this together.